Okay, hi everyone. My name's Caitlin. My groups are Cheyenne and Zaire. Today, we're just going to be talking about the transgender population and their families in addiction counseling and how to navigate that.
Hi, so this presentation will explore how families of transgender individuals struggling with substance abuse are impacted. We will introduce you to the population and provide you with statistics about the population and substance abuse. We will explore the importance of family support and acceptance when dealing with addiction. We will provide counselor recommendations when working with families of transgender individuals struggling with substance use. We will provide relevant journal article findings and clinical interventions and discuss the impact that addiction has on these individuals and their families. Lastly, we will provide a resource list for families of transgender individuals struggling with substance use. So very quickly, I wanted to discuss a few important topics and some terms that you'll hear throughout this presentation. The first one is addiction. So what is addiction? Addiction is a chronic and often relapsing, meaning that it's most likely to happen over and over again, condition that involves an inability to stop using a substance or engaging in a behavior, even though it may cause psychological and or physical harm. Another term is substance abuse. Substance abuse is a neuropsychiatric disorder that is characterized by an individual's recurring desire to continue taking the drugs despite its harmful consequences. The last one is what does it mean when somebody identifies as transgender? An individual who identifies as transgender is a person whose gender identity and gender expression does not conform to the one that is associated with the sex that they were assigned at birth.
So why we chose this population. Although acceptance in the transgender and the LGBTQ community has grown and increased over the last couple years, it is known that the subset of the transgender community has been kind of still shamed on and discriminated against. So the transgender community, they have faced greater healthcare barriers than cisgender individuals, which has in turn related to them not seeking addiction treatment and having low numbers in recovery. So we thought it would be a good idea to focus on this population because they are seen as a population that really can benefit from family and addictions counseling. Again, substance use in the transgender population, it oftentimes begins in their adolescence, in their early adulthood. This is kind of linked to what I talked about before, the discrimination, the shame. A lot of times, they have this fear of rejection when it comes with their family, so that stress can also often lead to them using substances to cope. And studies have shown that this population, those who are able to be supported by their parents and their friends and their family do have a higher chance of recovering from their addiction and having a healthier well-being. So this kind of all ties in together. So research shows that substance abuse disorders, they are considerably higher among transgender people, like I said before. As opposed to their cisgender counterparts, even as opposed to those in the LGBT community, such as like people who identify as lesbian, bi, or gay, they still have less than the transgender individuals. So just for example, compared with cisgender people, the use of drugs was 3.6 times higher than those who are transgender, and they had 5 times the rate of using marijuana, 4 times the rate of abusing cocaine, and 3 times the rate of opioid use. So as you can see, their rate of usage is a lot higher than others. And like I said before, this is linked to a lot of the stress that they face, a lot of that discrimination. They kind of use this as a coping mechanism. And then these are just some other stats that are important. 57% of the transgender community has experienced rejection by their families, which is a really, really large number. 53% have been verbally harassed in public settings. 97% have been harassed or discriminated against in work settings, which is really huge, which is basically the whole community. 28% have experienced harassment in medical settings, which is important when it comes to seeking treatment. A lot of them will not seek treatment because they fear being rejected. They feel not getting the same care that a cisgender person would, so they just don't go. And as many as 27% have been refused medical care in the past. These are just some journal article findings that I thought were relevant to why we chose this population. Um, Additionally, it has been shown that transgender individuals and in communities experience high rates of discrimination and low levels of social support, which are two very big factors that come into play when you think about having addiction and addictive behaviors. Research has also indicated that substance use within the community is more associated with sexual risk and mental health complications. So this doesn't just stop at using cocaine or marijuana, etc. This goes into other factors of their life. It can lead to depression as well and sexual problems. So this just further suggests that this subset is more vulnerable to the effects of addiction. Again, substance use among the community is used as an unhealthy strategy, like I said, a coping mechanism to deal with that stress that they're receiving, that rejection from their family. And it is shown that those who have a strong family relationship can reduce the risk that they will experience stressful events and those unhealthy coping strategies. So it's really important that they have family support and that they know they can lean on them. So they have someone just to be there for them when those outside barriers are discriminating against them, like we saw in the work settings, in the medical settings. So it's important for families to be there. So there was a study that analyzed data from 6,456 adults, and this was done by the National Transgender Discrimination. They were asked if they had ever abused drugs or alcohol to cope with transgender related discrimination or attempted suicide, and most of the participants did say, which was 54%, that they were experiencing a low amount of family rejection, and 31% experienced a moderate amount, and 14 experienced a higher amount, which it is good. But 14% is still a high amount. The more family rejection a person experienced, the higher their odds of substance misuse, the study found. These are just some counselor recommendations that we had. So some things to think about if you're working with a client's family who's in the transgender community and suffering with addiction. It's just important for the counselors working with these families to keep in mind that when a family member does come out as transgender, it can be a hard adjustment not only on that individual, but on their family as well. Especially when that person is also dealing with addiction, a family can often grieve that person's previous identity. So, coming out as transgender is a big thing, and sometimes families have a hard time not only accepting it, but kind of realizing why they want to be this other gender, what that even means. Also dealing with the grief of what that person used to be when they weren't addicted to a substance. It can be something that's really hard for families to work through, and then you throw on top of them now having to process their family member going by something else can be hard. So it's important that counselors can work through that, because sometimes it's not the family not wanting to accept them, it's just that they really don't understand. Um, So, counselors should just be culturally competent and sensitive with that, and be aware that these individuals and these family members are experiencing unique challenges that not everyone faces. So their community is really unique and you have to treat them as such.
All right. So some of this will touch on some of the things that Caitlin already spoke about, but I did want to go very quickly over the risk factors for substance abuse among the transgender community. One of the biggest things that is a risk factor is minority stress. What is minority stress? It's usually high levels of stress that members of a stigmatized minority group will face. So, for instance, you are going into a setting where there's no other transgender individuals, so you're kind of singled out. And because of that, you are a lot more aware of the things that happen around you. So you may be a lot more stressed in these environments. Next thing is isolation. So because of the stress, because you feel different, or maybe you don't identify like everybody else does, a lot of these individuals tend to isolate themselves from situations and settings. The next thing is genetics is a big risk factor, not just for the transgender community, but for anybody who has family members with pre-existing issues with substance abuse. So, for instance, alcohol addiction is actually 50% heritable, and while addiction to other drugs is as much as 70% heritable. There are also environmental factors that may be a risk factor, such as the ease of availability. Are you in an environment where drugs are readily available? Are you in an environment where you are constantly around opioids or alcohol? That does play into effect. The next thing is mental health issues. A lot of people struggle with anxiety or things like depression, and a lot of the times that those issues will lead to an individual seeking substance use. Common factors. So I did want to touch base on the common factors that lead to substance abuse in the transgender community as well. One of the biggest things is trauma. A lot of transgender individuals have reported instances of sexual assault, harassment, and hate crimes in a variety of environments and settings. The next is shame and social stigma. Feeling ashamed to be who you are, especially when you're kind of like singled out in a room. The fear of coming out. A lot of individuals will quote unquote stay in the closet to avoid the shame and social stigma that comes with coming out. Internalized homophobia. So this is actually self-blaming for being different, even when the family is accepting. So although their family may be supportive, they are ashamed of how they feel and who they are and why that makes them different. Co-occurring disorders and an unstable toxic support system. So what happens when their family is not accepting of who they are? Is that environment supportive? If it isn't, this can definitely lead to substance abuse. And culture. And we have a quick video. So Caitlin, we can start this one at 50 seconds and end around 3 minutes and 24 seconds. This is just a quick video that discusses who have faced these factors.
No, please. I just miss my mom.
Cannot go for more than 90 seconds.
So I've been struggling with a substance abuse problem maybe since I was 16.
Like when I was 19, since I was 18 years old.
And I remember being 15 years old and thinking like, this is gonna be a problem.
My drug of choice was crystal meth, and I got into it because of an ex-boyfriend of mine.
My drug of choice was drinking and Coke.
You were a wino.
From alcohol to marijuana to cocaine to crystal meth and like lots of party drugs.
I don't imagine you being into depressants. I picture you like up and happy and smiling and like yapping away and prancing about.
Cleaning the house. On meth. Spotless.
My sexuality didn't really play a role in my substance abuse. I drank because I was depressed. I drank because I didn't feel great about myself.
My sexuality did play a role in my substance abuse problem.
I internalized a lot of shame about being gay growing up, and I felt like I didn't belong, and I felt like if I drank and used drugs, that I could push all that down and not have to feel that.
For the first time in my life, I was like one of the cool kids, you know? I wanted to keep doing it because this is the one time in my life I felt like I could be here whenever I felt like I was here.
I needed to drink in order to like go through my day.
What we're all looking for is just, how do I cope with this? How do I manage this?
A way to escape.
Yeah.
You literally feel empty. You hide every single part of who you are just to not feel, to get through the day without having to feel any emotion at all.
I would describe addiction as an attempt to manage uncomfortable feelings.
It is a very serious disease that a lot of people die from.
Having a substance or having an act that takes over your life,
You feel kind of incomplete without it.
you lose a piece of yourself, and that piece is like what I call your humanity side.
The first time I found out you had a substance abuse problem was when your ex was prepping me on meeting you.
When you're peeing your pants on a red carpet, things are not going well in your life.
Right.
I was literally pushing everyone
We can
away.
stop here.
And then at the same time, sorry,
So, okay.
Bring it back.
You can press escape.
One second, let me stop sharing my screen. Sorry.
All right, so that was just a quick video to bring you to reality. It just says how substance abuse affects individuals and not just themselves, but the people around them. All right, so we can go to the next. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the impact of addiction on the individual. So addiction and substance use disorders can do multiple things. For one, they can alter the brain chemistry and increase the risk of mental health issues. For example, regular drug use actually causes the brain to produce, absorb, and transmit less dopamine, resulting in a chemical imbalance in the brain. So a lot of times when individuals use substances, it releases a pleasure, like a pleasure principle, and they want to feel that over and over again, especially when they're struggling with things like anxiety or depression. One of the other things that it can do is negatively impact your physical health. So, for example, individuals who are heavy drinkers long term for years and years and years, they may develop cirrhosis of the liver due to alcoholism. It can negatively impact your social life. You may lose friends, you may lose family members who no longer want to deal with, you and your situation. You may lose your job. You may start going in later. You might start missing days. So it can impact you in so many different ways. Another way is financially. How are you getting these substances? How much money are you spending to obtain these substances? It can also lead to homelessness. It can lead to incarceration and legal issues and changes in the mood. It can make you irritable and less likely to be your normal self. All right, so I also wanted to touch base on the impact that addiction has on the family members of an individual who is using substances. So it can cause financial hardship, poverty, bankruptcy. It can cause social isolation. Family members may be ashamed to tell other family members about their situation or their friends, or their co-workers and things like that. So they might isolate themselves. They may not want to go to a party, especially when, let's say, their son has an issue with alcohol. They might not want to bring their son to the party, so they might just isolate themselves overall. It also affects the family members and loved ones of the individual who is suffering from addiction. They're likely to develop their own health issues from their stress. It's actually more likely for an individual, a family member of the individual using substances, to actually go to the hospital before the person using substances because of the stress that it puts on their heart. They may develop high blood pressure and things of that sort. There's increased risk of developing SUDS themselves. So the stress of dealing with somebody who is dealing with substance use disorders may lead to them doing it themselves. They might be readily available. They may need to cope with their situation. For younger children with parents who are addicted to substances, they may have an impaired attachment. They may have unmet developmental needs because their parent may not be focusing on them or helping them grow the way that they should be, or providing the environment that promotes growth. It may cause emotional distress and division among family members. Maybe the parent who is a parent of a child who is using substances, they may want to just take themselves completely away from them. Maybe they kick them out of the home to not deal with the situation. The next thing is that I wanted to talk about is that studies of families with SUDS reveal patterns that significantly influence child development and the likelihood that a child will struggle with emotional, behavioral, or substance use problems themselves. Parental SUDS can lead to the disruption of attachments, like I said before, rituals, roles, routines, communication, social life, and finances. And lastly, the home may be characterized by an environment of secrecy, loss, conflict, violence, or abuse, emotional chaos, role reversal. So the child may be taking care of the parent instead of it being the other way around. And lastly, fear.
So change is expected within the therapeutic process. However, this must be a voluntary response from the client, especially when working with families with families who have addicted persons. It is crucial to show cultural sensitivity. The family as a whole what I mean by that, the family as a whole may not understand the concept or the concept of change. So within that, I'm sorry. So within that, as you can see on this slide, I had referenced the theoretical model of change, and the 5 stages that are known here is the pre-contemplation stage. That's the initial part of counseling where the client would be completely in denial to say that they don't have a problem. Once they've overcome that initial point of denial, they will be in the contemplation stage where they end up thinking about it, thinking about the fact that they have a problem. They may know that there's a problem, but they may not understand the root of the problem. Next, the preparation stage. So now they're ready to make the change, but they may not know which steps to take. So this is where the counselor will then help them to implement certain changes and strategies. And so throughout this process, the counselor is with the client, helping them navigate through making that decision. Because again, the family as a whole, and including the addicted individual, may not be aware or have even thought of making possible change, because prior to stepping into counseling, which is key for the pre-contemplation stage, when they're in the place of denial, they don't believe that their situation is the problem of their situation is the reality. So after they have gone through the preparation stage, then they'll make visible stages of taking action, where they're saying, okay, I'm now making changes. And the therapist would see visible changes where they're going to AA groups and being around certain environments that wouldn't tempt them to the place of doing specific drugs. And the last stage will be the maintenance stage, where there's usually a follow-up at this point of them showing that they're doing it. Now, what's not mentioned within this process is the area of relapse. So the relapse is common through all stages prior to the relapse stages common all throughout, because even when someone has taken action, they could revert back to areas of contemplation. They may have put themselves in unsafe environments, which will then bring on stress for them to then do the drugs in the first place. So even though this is not mentioned, relapse is another portion of addiction that occurs all throughout this process of change. Okay, so another form of intervention would be rational reframing. So within this, this is where the family as a whole, moving away from individual ways of thinking about the problem and focusing on understanding the relationships. Then they will go from focusing on understanding the motives between the addict's behavior and those around them. So one thing that the therapist could possibly say is, I wonder if because of what happened in the past, everyone in your family is anxious, and there are different ways to deal with that anxiousness. Maybe you were using substances because you're pretty scared. I bet you're pretty scared. Another one will be family restructuring. This intervention aims to change the way the structure of the family is being run. Family members are curious about their addicted members' life in a non-judgmental way. What does your family member think is good about using drugs? What is your family member hopeful about, or worried about? Is there anything your child worries about related to drugs or about risk of their behavior? So these are all questions that the counselor would possibly ask in that process to the family.
And these are just some resources that we have listed. These are all clickable. You can these aren't only specifically for transgender individuals, but there are some that are specifically, but the rest of them are kind of tailored to the whole LGBTQ community, everyone under that umbrella. So these are just, some are actual places you can go that are LGBTQ friendly for treatment. Some recovery meetings that are helpful, and just some ways that the community is impacted by addiction and recovery. So counselors can use these in the counseling session, can give them to their clients and their family to read a little more and to get a little more support. But these are just important because, like I said before, a lot of transgender individuals do not seek treatment because they're afraid of that discrimination. So these resources are good because it kind of gives them an all-inclusive to their community, and it gives them people who are willing to help, who kind of understand them a little more because they're in it. So these are just good resources to have. And then these are just our references, and that is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.